Hello everyone. Today I have to share the story of what I thought was the biggest betrayal of my life. The day she didn't notice the silence at first. The kind of silence that creeps in when laughter suddenly dies, when forks pause midair, when eyes turn but no one dares to look directly at you. The chandelier above the dining table glowed warm and golden, casting reflections off crystal glasses and polished silverware, but none of that warmth reached her chest. She sat there, shoulders slightly hunched, one hand instinctively wrapped around her youngest daughter's back, as if her body already knew something was wrong before her mind could catch up. Her husband sat beside her, holding a printed guest list, his face pale, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, not in defense, not in concern, but in quiet panic. Across the table stood the woman in the gold dress, the mistress. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect timing. And then the words came, sharp and deliberate, each one designed to land like a slap. "I'm sorry," the woman said sweetly, tilting her head, "but this dinner is for people who actually belong here." The children stiffened. One of them swallowed hard. Another looked down at her lap. Her mother felt it then, the humiliation burning hot under her skin, the kind that makes your ears ring and your vision blur. She waited, just a second, for her husband to stand up, to say something, anything, but he didn't. He stayed seated, silent, letting it happen, letting another woman erase her dignity in front of strangers, in front of their children. What none of them knew, what no one in that room could have imagined, was that less than 48 hours earlier, a man whose name the world whispered with awe and fear had died quietly in a private hospital suite. A man worth trillions, a man with no public heirs, a man whose final sealed documents carried one name written again and again, hers. And while she sat there being humiliated, unaware, blamed, dismissed as disposable, an entire empire had already begun searching for the woman who didn't yet know she owned it all. She had learned long ago how to disappear without leaving the room. It was a survival skill, honed through years of quiet compromises, swallowed words, and carefully chosen silences. So when the mistress's voice floated through the dining hall again, soft, amused, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, she didn't flinch outwardly. Inside, something cracked. "I just assumed," the woman continued, resting manicured fingers on the back of her chair, "that you'd understand your position by now." Her husband still didn't move. He stared at the paper in his hands like it held the answers to a different life, one where this moment didn't exist. The woman waited. She counted seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3. Each second stretched longer than the last. She remembered the early days of their marriage, how he used to reach for her hand in crowded rooms, how he once told her she was his safe place. That version of him felt like someone she had imagined. Now the man beside her didn't even look at her. The guests around them shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered. Others pretended not to notice, sipping wine and staring at centerpieces, grateful it wasn't happening to them. Her oldest child leaned closer, pressing her forehead against her arm. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely there. That single word nearly broke her. She tightened her embrace around all three children, feeling how small they were, how fragile. This was not how she had imagined their holiday. This was not the lesson she wanted them to learn about love, about loyalty, about self-worth. And yet, here it was, being carved into them in real time. The mistress finally laughed softly, the sound light and cruel at the same time. "Honestly," she said, glancing around the table, "we're just trying to keep things appropriate." The word lingered in the air like a verdict. Appropriate, as if a decade-long marriage and 3 children were suddenly an inconvenience, a social misstep. The woman felt heat rise to her face, but forced herself to stay seated. She knew what standing up would look like. She knew how easily anger could be twisted into proof that she didn't belong. So she stayed still. She swallowed the pain. She chose dignity, even when it hurt more than shouting ever could. Her husband cleared his throat, finally shifting in his chair. For a split second, hope flickered, but then he sighed, tired, resigned, and said, "Let's not make a scene." That was it. That was the moment she understood. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught off guard. He had chosen, not loudly, not proudly, but clearly. He had chosen the comfort of silence over the courage to protect his family. Something inside her went numb. Not anger, not sadness, something colder. She looked at him then, not pleading, not accusing, just looking. And for the first time, she saw him as he truly was, a man who feared inconvenience more than injustice, a man who valued appearances more than vows, a man who could watch his children be humiliated and still worry about how the room felt. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her purse. The sound of the chair moving scraped against the floor, drawing every eye back to her. The mistress's smile faltered just slightly. "We'll go," the woman said calmly, her voice steady despite the storm raging beneath it. "Thank you for clarifying." She stood, helping her children to their feet, smoothing her daughter's hair, straightening her son's collar. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't ask for permission. As she turned to leave, her husband finally looked up. "You're overreacting," he said quietly, as if this were a private disagreement and not a public erasure. She paused at the edge of the room and looked back at him one last time. "No," she replied softly, "I'm finally seeing clearly." Then she walked out into the cold night air, the door closing behind her with a sound that felt far louder than it was. What she didn't know as she buckled her children into the car with shaking hands, as she wiped silent tears from her youngest cheeks, was that at that exact moment, in a glass-walled boardroom hundreds of miles away, a team of lawyers, advisors, and private investigators were arguing over how to locate her. A massive digital screen displayed a single name, highlighted in bold. Her name, the daughter of a man whose wealth had quietly shaped governments, industries, and markets, a man who had watched her life from a distance, respecting the boundary she never knew existed, a man who had died days earlier, leaving behind a final instruction that changed everything. Find her, protect her, and tell her the truth. While she drove away from the only life she had known, believing she had lost everything, the world she had never known was already moving toward her, fast, inevitable, and unforgiving. That night, sleep refused to come. It hovered just out of reach, like a promise that kept breaking itself. The children eventually drifted off in the unfamiliar quiet of the small motel room she'd stopped at without thinking, their bodies curled close together on the bed, instinctively seeking comfort from one another. She lay awake on the stiff mattress, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling where light from the parking lot slipped through the curtains. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She ignored it. Everything felt overwhelming, too loud, too sharp, too heavy. Her chest ached in a way that felt physical, like grief pressing inward from all sides. She replayed the dinner again and again, searching for the moment she might have missed, the signs she should have noticed earlier. Had the distance started months ago? Years? Or had it always been there, hiding behind routines and responsibilities? She pressed her palm flat against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. All she knew was this: whatever life she thought she had built had just collapsed, and she had no idea how to explain that kind of loss to children who still believed their father would come looking for them. Morning arrived without ceremony. No clarity, no relief, just exhaustion. She showered quickly, letting the water run longer than necessary, hoping it might wash away the heaviness clinging to her skin. When she stepped back into the room, her phone buzzed again, then again. Missed calls, unknown numbers, voicemails she didn't listen to. Fear pricked at the edges of her mind. Had something happened? Was this about the dinner? About him? She silenced the phone and focused on getting the kids dressed, fed, ready. Stability, she told herself, one step at a time. They ate dry cereal from paper cups, sitting cross-legged on the bed, quiet in a way that hurt more than tears would have. When they were done, her oldest looked up at her and asked, "Are we going home?" The question landed like a punch. She forced a small smile. "We're figuring it out," she said gently. It was the most honest answer she had. They were just packing up when there was a knock at the door, firm, polite, unmistakably intentional. Her stomach tightened. She motioned for the children to stay back and approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. Two men stood outside. Both wore dark suits, not flashy, not aggressive, just precise, the kind of men who didn't knock on the wrong doors. She opened it only a few inches. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. One of the men gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Daniel Harris. We apologize for the intrusion, but we've been trying to reach you. We believe you're in danger of making some very big decisions without the information you deserve." Her heart began to race. "I think you have the wrong person," she replied, instinctively protective. The second man spoke then, his voice calm but weighted with authority. "We don't," he said. "You are the daughter of Elias Moreau." The name meant nothing to her. She frowned. "I don't know who that is." The men exchanged a glance. Daniel took a breath. "That's exactly what he expected you to say." They didn't step inside until she invited them. Even then, they remained standing, as if aware they were intruding on something fragile. The children watched from the bed, eyes wide, sensing the shift in the air. Daniel pulled a slim folder from his briefcase and placed it gently on the small table. "Elias Moreau passed away 3 days ago," he said. "He was one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. He owned controlling interests in technology, energy, finance, industries that shape economies. And according to legally verified documents, DNA confirmation, and sealed directives, you are his biological daughter." The words felt unreal, absurd. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible," she said. "My father died when I was a teenager. He was a mechanic." Daniel nodded slowly. "The man who raised you was your father in every way that mattered," he said. "Elias Moreau never disputed that. He never interfered. He believed your happiness depended on not knowing." Her knees felt weak. She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why tell me now?" The second man answered, "Because his death activated the trust, and because his will leaves everything, companies, assets, holdings, everything to you." The room felt too small for the truth settling inside it. She shook her head slowly, hands trembling. "I don't want it," she said reflexively. "I didn't ask for this." Daniel's expression softened. "He knew you wouldn't," he said. "That's why he admired you." She looked up sharply. "You didn't know me." Daniel met her gaze. "He did," he replied. "He knew about your marriage, your children, the sacrifices you made, the nights you went without so they wouldn't. He knew because he watched, from a distance, not to control your life, but to ensure it was never destroyed by forces you couldn't see." Her breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. "Then why didn't he save me?" she asked quietly. The room went silent. Daniel answered carefully, "Because he believed strength mattered more than rescue, and because he believed that when the truth came, it would come at the moment you needed it most." Outside, a car door closed. Somewhere far away, a financial world was already shifting, and inside that small motel room, a woman who thought she had lost everything was standing at the edge of a truth powerful enough to change not just her future, but the fate of everyone who had ever underestimated her. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like dust after a collapse, coating everything she thought she knew, changing the shape of familiar memories. Long after the men had left, after they'd promised protection, time, and space, she sat alone at the small table while her children slept. The folder lay unopened in front of her. She didn't touch it. Part of her feared that if she did, the life she had lived until now would disappear completely. Another part feared that if she didn't, she would remain the woman who had just been publicly erased, quietly discarded. She pressed her fingertips against the edge of the table, grounding herself. She had spent her entire life surviving without answers. She could survive this too. Eventually, she opened the folder. Inside were documents she barely understood, corporate structures, trusts, international holdings, but what stopped her were the personal things. A photograph, her at 8 years old, sitting on a cracked front step, missing 2 teeth, smiling without fear. Her breath caught. She didn't remember anyone taking that picture. A school report card, a medical bill she'd once cried over because she didn't know how she'd pay it. Letters, unsent. Dozens of them, handwritten, each one dated, each one addressed to her, each one sealed and never delivered. She opened the first with shaking hands. "I see you growing into strength without knowing where it comes from," it read. "That strength is yours, not mine. I will not interrupt it." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. This man, this stranger, had known her pain, had watched her struggle, and still believed in her enough to wait. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. By morning, something inside her had shifted. Not confidence, not ambition, clarity. She called the number Daniel had left. Her voice didn't shake when she spoke. "I need boundaries," she said, "and I need my children protected." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Already done," Daniel replied. Within hours, discreet security appeared. Not looming, not obvious, just present. A new hotel room, safer, quieter. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked tired, yes, but also awake. Fully awake, and somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion, something steadier had taken root: resolve. Her husband didn't call that day, or the next, but the third day her phone lit up with his name. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Where are you?" he demanded, skipping concern entirely. "You embarrassed me." She almost laughed. "I protected our children," she said calmly. "You let them be humiliated." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic. You always do this." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "No," she said. "I finally stopped." Silence stretched between them. Then his tone changed, softened, calculated. "Come home," he said. "We'll talk." For the first time, she didn't feel the pull. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice." She ended the call before he could respond. What she didn't know was that elsewhere conversations were happening. Her husband's business partner noticed a frozen account. The mistress received a call canceling a sponsorship deal she'd been bragging about. A charity board quietly removed her name. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just doors closing one by one. Meanwhile, a private legal team began reviewing years of marital finances, property records, contracts signed without her full knowledge. Patterns emerged. So did leverage. Daniel briefed her, carefully, respectfully. "You don't have to do anything," he reminded her, "but you should know what's possible." She listened, not with greed, with understanding. For years, she had been told to stay quiet, stay small, stay grateful. Now the truth was handing her choices, real ones. That evening, she sat with her children, reading to them like she always had. Routine mattered. Stability mattered. When her youngest asked, "Are we safe?" she kissed her forehead and said, "Yes." And for the first time, she knew it was true. Later, alone, she finally allowed herself to imagine a future not shaped by fear, not revenge, freedom, dignity, space to breathe. She wasn't planning retaliation. She didn't need to. The world had its own way of correcting imbalances, and she was no longer standing in its way. Far across the city, her husband stared at his phone, unease creeping into his chest. Deals stalled, calls went unanswered. The mistress paced, irritated, sensing something slipping beyond her control. Neither of them connected the dots yet. Neither imagined that the woman they had dismissed as replaceable had quietly become untouchable. She didn't announce herself. She didn't threaten. She simply stepped into the truth and let it speak for itself. And somewhere in the silence between cause and consequence, the balance began to shift. The invitation arrived without drama. No threat, no explanation, just a time, a place, and a quiet expectation of attendance. A private legal mediation office downtown, neutral ground. Her name printed cleanly at the top, his beneath it. When she read it, she felt no fear, only a calm awareness that this moment had been moving toward her since the night she walked out of that dinner. She chose a simple outfit, nothing extravagant, nothing defensive. Power didn't need decoration. Daniel waited outside the building but didn't follow her in. "You don't need me in the room," he said gently. "You already carry enough." She nodded, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside alone. Her husband was already there. He stood when he saw her, surprise flashing across his face before irritation took over. "So you finally decided to talk," he said, forcing a thin smile. The mistress sat beside him, dressed carefully, eyes sharp with curiosity and contempt tangled together. She looked her up and down openly, as if reassessing a mistake she didn't yet understand. The mediator gestured for them to sit. As they did, her husband leaned closer and whispered, "What is this about? You think you can scare me with paperwork?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to scare you," she replied. "I'm here to end things clearly." That word, clearly, seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever had. The mediator began with formalities, outlining the purpose of the meeting: asset disclosures, custody considerations, financial transparency. Her husband laughed under his breath. "This is unnecessary," he said. "She doesn't even know what she's asking for." The mediator glanced at her. She gave a small nod. "Proceed," she said. The first document slid across the table, then the second, then the third. Each one landed heavier than the last. Her husband's smile faded. He leaned forward, scanning the pages, confusion turning into alarm. "What is this?" he demanded. The mediator answered calmly. "These are holdings connected to a trust that now intersects with your shared marital assets." The mistress stiffened. "Intersect how?" she snapped. The mediator didn't look at her. "In ways that significantly alter the balance you assumed existed." Her husband's hands began to shake slightly. "This doesn't make sense," he said, flipping pages faster now. "She doesn't own anything." The mediator paused and looked directly at him. "That assumption," he said evenly, "is no longer accurate." Silence filled the room, the kind that presses against your ears. The mistress laughed once, sharp and brittle. "This is some kind of bluff," she said, waving a hand. "You're trying to intimidate us." Finally, she spoke, not loudly, not triumphantly, just with quiet certainty. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," she said. "I'm simply no longer hiding." Her husband stared at her, searching her face for the woman he thought he knew, the one who would back down, soften, apologize. She didn't, and something in his expression shifted from irritation to fear. The mediator continued. "Due to recent developments," he explained, "full financial review is now mandatory. Temporary account restrictions have been applied pending disclosure." Her husband shot to his feet. "You froze my accounts?" he shouted. The mediator raised a hand. Not frozen, monitored. The difference mattered. The mistress stood as well. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Do you know who I am?" The mediator finally looked at her. "Yes," he said calmly, "and at this point, that information is no longer relevant." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Her husband turned to her then, panic rising. "What did you do?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him the way one looks at a stranger who used to be family. "I stopped protecting you from consequences," she said softly. The room tilted, not physically, but emotionally. He ran a hand through his hair, voice lowering. "We can fix this. You don't have to do this." She almost felt sorry for him then, not because he was losing something, but because he had never understood what he'd been standing on. "You already fixed it, the night you let another woman humiliate me in front of our children." The mistress scoffed, crossing her arms. "Don't be dramatic. You weren't invited, that's all." Slowly, she turned her gaze to her. Not angry, not defensive, just clear. "You didn't humiliate me," she said. "You revealed yourselves." The mistress's face flushed. "You think money changes who you are?" she snapped. She held her gaze. "No," she replied. "It changes who no longer gets to control me." The mediator cleared his throat and slid one final document forward. "This," he said, "is the custody proposal." Her husband grabbed it, reading quickly. His face drained of color. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You need me." She shook her head gently. "I needed you," she corrected. "My children need peace." The mediator's voice was steady. "Based on evidence presented," he said, "temporary primary custody is recommended pending final review." The mistress backed away from the table, suddenly unsure. Her husband looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, and he saw it. Not weakness, not submission, authority, not borrowed, earned. When the meeting ended, she stood calmly, gathering her things. She didn't gloat, she didn't threaten. As she walked toward the door, her husband called out, voice breaking, "You think you've won?" She paused, turning slightly. "This was never a competition," she said. "It was my life." And then she left. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because everything was solved, but because nothing was being denied anymore. Behind her, two people sat in a room full of papers and consequences, finally understanding that the woman they had dismissed had not risen to meet them. She had simply stopped kneeling. The truth didn't explode the way people imagine power does. There were no headlines screaming her name, no cameras chasing her down sidewalks, no dramatic announcements made from marble podiums. Instead, the world shifted quietly, like a tide that changes direction without asking permission. Financial news outlets reported the death of a reclusive titan whose wealth had shaped industries from behind the curtain. Analysts spoke in cautious tones about an unnamed heir. Boardrooms across continents adjusted strategies. Stocks trembled, stabilized, then climbed. Somewhere inside all that movement was her name, protected, deliberate, revealed only where it needed to be. She watched none of it. Her focus was elsewhere. She stood in the kitchen of her new home, sunlight spilling across the floor, watching her children laugh over something small and ridiculous. The sound felt unfamiliar at first, unburdened laughter, the kind that doesn't flinch. She leaned against the counter, coffee cooling in her hands, and felt something settle inside her chest. Peace didn't arrive loudly. It arrived like permission. Permission to breathe, permission to stop apologizing for existing, permission to believe that survival had not been the end of her story, only the beginning of her strength. Her phone buzzed occasionally, updates from Daniel, careful and respectful. Legal transitions progressing smoothly, trust structures finalized, protections in place. She listened, asked questions, learned when she needed to, but she refused to be swallowed by it. Power, she was discovering, didn't demand obsession, it demanded clarity. She set boundaries early. No exploitation, no public spectacle. Her children's lives would remain ordinary in all the ways that mattered. Private schools declined, media silence enforced, security discreet. "I want them to know who they are without the world telling them," she said once. Daniel nodded. "Your father would have said the same." The first public consequence arrived weeks later, quietly devastating in its precision. Her husband's company announced a strategic restructuring. Contracts dissolved, partnerships ended. His name, once welcomed in certain rooms, stopped opening doors. Not because she demanded it, but because the ecosystem he relied on no longer trusted him. He tried calling her again. This time, the tone was different. Careful, polite, afraid. She didn't answer. Closure didn't require conversation. It required distance. The mistress fared worse. Social invitations dried up. Sponsors vanished. The charm that once worked so easily now met closed smiles and unanswered messages. She was not ruined. She was irrelevant. And that, she learned too late, was far more painful. One afternoon, months later, her children asked about their father. The question came gently, without accusation. She sat with them on the couch, choosing honesty over bitterness. "He made choices," she said softly, "and those choices couldn't be part of our home anymore." Her oldest nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already felt. "We're okay now," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "Yes," she replied, "we are." That night, alone in her study, she opened the last letter from the folder, the one she had avoided. Her father's handwriting was steady, deliberate. "If you are reading this," it began, "then the world has finally shown you its sharp edges. I wish I could have softened them for you, but I trusted that you would survive them, and you did." She remembered the dinner, the humiliation, the silence, the way she had walked out holding her children like anchors to reality. "Everything I build exists to protect, not to rule," the letter continued. "Use it only if it serves your peace. Walk away if it doesn't." She closed the letter and held it to her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel abandoned by the past. She felt understood. Months passed, then a year. She began funding quiet initiatives, women rebuilding after betrayal, children navigating broken homes, legal aid for those silenced by power they didn't have. Her name appeared on nothing. The work spoke instead. One evening, she attended a small charity event, not as a donor, not as an heiress, but as a speaker. She stood at the podium, steady and unadorned, and spoke about dignity, about the moment you realize you've been living smaller than you deserve, about the strength it takes not to seek revenge, but to choose freedom. The room listened. Some cried. She didn't mention her wealth. She didn't need to. Later that night, standing alone beneath a quiet sky, she thought about the woman she had been at the dinner table, the one waiting for someone else to save her. She felt compassion, not shame. That woman had done the best she could with what she knew, and when the truth finally arrived, she had risen to meet it, not with fury, but with grace. The world would remember her as an heiress, perhaps, as a name tied to unimaginable wealth, but that was never the victory. The victory was simpler. She had walked away from humiliation without becoming bitter. She had gained power without losing herself. She had taught her children by example that silence is not strength, and dignity is never something you ask permission for. Somewhere far away, the echo of a dinner party no longer mattered. What mattered was this: she knew who she was now, not because of money, not because of legacy, but because she survived being underestimated and chose not to remain there. And that, she realized, was the kind of wealth no one could ever take from her. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of justice, and share this video with a friend. Until next time, stay strong. Don't forget to subscribe.